African Americans have voted faithfully for the Democratic Party since 1964 and the passage of the civil rights legislation. A matter of fact, according to the Pew Research Institute, African Americans identify as Democrats over 80% of the time since 1992. But given the decline of the black community and Joe Biden's recent lack of black appointments, some argue that we are not getting the most for our vote. So what should we do about the black vote? This is State of the Water, and I'm your host, award-winning Dr. Eric Claville, and we want to hear from you as we discuss the black vote and inform the public about these and other important issues. And we'll be right back. Welcome back to State of the Water, and I'm your host, award-winning Dr. Eric Claville. We want to thank everybody for joining us on this December 6th, 2020. And for those of you who are out there on the East Coast and also in the Midwest, you know the weather has changed. So we hope that you're staying warm and you're taking care of yourselves as we switch into the seasons. Understand that we're still in COVID environment and you're being safe and understanding the importance of not only protecting yourselves, but also protecting your fellow neighbor. But today I want to jump right into it. We're going to talk about the black vote. You know, there's been many talks and understand we're still in the election season, and we're going to be talking about the election season all the way through December, and we'll also get into it during the inauguration in January. But we want to take a closer look at African Americans and what the African American vote has done for the Democratic Party. Now, I mentioned earlier in the introduction and taking a look at a study, the Pew Research Institute measured that since 1992, African Americans have identified as Democrats overwhelmingly by over 80% since 1992. And from that time period, we see during our presidential elections, we've voted for President Clinton, and we voted also for Al Gore, who was vice president at the time. We voted for John Kerry, of course, Barack Obama in historic, both in 2008, 2012, Hillary Clinton, and also now with Joe Biden. And identifying more so as Democrats, individuals have shown that they have given blind loyalty. And that's been some of the criticism of voting for the Democrats. Well, I want to talk today about not just the history of it, but also should we give our allegiance to the Democratic Party blindly? And what are we getting for it? 757-823-9110, 757-823-9110. Again, we're talking about the black vote. And again, we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts? Are we getting the most for our vote? Should we just be giving our vote to the Democratic Party blindly? Or should we also have a seat at the table of the Republican Party? Or should we look at a third party? These are all issues that we want to hear from you. And why do you vote the way that you vote? 757-823-9110. So let's go back and take a look at the history. So since the passage of the civil rights legislation of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, of course, other acts in 1965, 1968, of course, 1970, African Americans have voted faithfully in increasing numbers for the Democratic Party. As a matter of fact, President Lyndon Johnson, who actually pushed the vision of President Kennedy about the America that he believed that we should be living in today, which is what we are living in. You know, he believed that we had given the South, the Republican Party, for about 50 years. Well, it's been more than that, and he was exactly right, because we saw the pushback against civil rights legislation, right? The pushback of having African Americans be a part of society in equal format or equal rights as their white counterparts. So since that time period, African Americans have voted and supported Democratic candidates. And if you look at the candidates that support your issues, of course you're going to vote for them. Okay? Those of us that lived during the time of the 60s, the 50s, even the 70s, understood that it was a hostile time period, even more hostile than we see now. A lot of people talk about what we see now in our society. Is this the America that we know? And if you're talking to the African Americans, the answer is absolutely yes. And we've actually seen worse. This is the America that we know. But we know it can be better, and we continue to fight for it to be better. But you're going to vote for the candidate that's going to have your interests at heart. And that's what you want to do. And that's exactly what we did as the African Americans. So we saw various gains in business. We saw various gains in corporate businesses, various gains in government. African Americans being elected to not just federal offices, but also state and local, which is the most important politics. Local and state politics is the most important politics, which is why we should vote in our local races. And we'll talk about the 90th district race, the special election that's coming up January 5th, after the two parties have their firehouse primaries on the side of the Democrats and Republicans. And this is the seat that Representative Joe Lindsay, who is now Judge Lindsay, congratulations to the judge, was appointed as judge in the vacant seat in Norfolk City Court. So we voted our interests, but many believe that we haven't got the most for our vote. As a matter of fact, there's been a lot of talk and looking back at legislation, looking back at the crime bill that was passed, looking back at the crack laws that were passed, looking back at the creation of the pipeline, school to prison pipeline that was created by this legislation that was led in part by the Democratic representatives, the candidates that we voted into office. So some see that their communities have been decimated by legislation that has harmed the black community. Now, there has been legislation that's helped, but over time, there has been less and less legislation to give the African American community a hand up and a fighting for certain rights, civil rights, that maybe not all African Americans would benefit from. Some believe it's been more of a liberal, or what's being called a progressive liberal agenda, as opposed to a black agenda. And that's an interesting discussion that we'll have another time. What is the black agenda, and what is the, how is it different from the progressive liberal and the conservative agenda? Or is it a mixture of two? But that's a great topic, and we'll discuss that at another time. I'm going to take note of that. But putting these candidates in office, we've saw where our communities have been decimated by policies under the Nixon administration, various policies were social programs and redlining districts within our communities, not allowing growth in our communities on the local level, through the chambers of commerce, on the state level, and of course the federal level, creating policies that make it hard for black families to survive. I call it one example is what I call the Claudine effect. And those of you who were in the classic movies with Diane Carroll, James Earl Jones played in the movie Claudine, where you couldn't have a man in the house if you're getting welfare benefits during the time where it's very hard to find jobs, during the time of the oil embargo, where you couldn't get federal assistance if you had a man in the house, meaning a husband. So therefore, some people, in their interest, they said, well, instead of getting married, we'll just cohabitate so we can continue to get these benefits. But it backfired on the African American community by decimating the family unit. But according to after the Nixon administration, this is exactly what these policies were meant for. All right. Hats off to Mitt Romney's father, who served in the Nixon administration during that time period, who, charged the Nixon administration for these harmful policies under HUD. And he was run out of the Nixon administration because those were the policies that the Nixon administration wanted to give, wanted to cripple the black community. Because keep in mind that we were coming out of the 60s where we saw the black community as strong as it had ever been. How many guys remember that? African-American men marching, and families and brave African-American women also working to register people to vote. The Black Panther Party opening up clinics, feeding programs, after-school programs, African-American men, the preachers, the ministers, business owners, marching in the streets saying that we are going to march for not dignity, but also opportunities in business and society. That was the strongest that I remember the African-American community as a whole has ever been. And that was frightening to the powers to be. So now you see these policies that come in to try to dismantle these systems, try to dismantle the community, try to dismantle the family, and cripple the African-American community. But at the same time, we see an uptick in voting for Democratic candidates. But still, a lot of the businesses in our black community, which were owned primarily by African Americans, are not owned by the African Americans anymore. I grew up, I remember that the local gas station was owned by African American. And I right in my community. The barbershop, the beauty shop, my father owned the child care center and the law firms, all those were African Americans. The tax preparer and the like. The only thing that we didn't own at the time was the local grocery store. But there were other individuals in other neighborhoods where African Americans owned the stores on the corners, or what we would call on the East Coast bodegos, right? But we don't see that anymore. But still, we're voting, quote unquote, our interests. So this is what I mean by when some people believe that we're not getting the most for our vote. So now the question becomes, what is the responsibility of these Democratic candidates that we're voting into office, and what is the responsibility of the community as we put these individuals in office? I want to know what you think. 757-823-9110, 757-823-9110. And in the second hour, we're going to talk about, should African Americans have a seat at all political party tables? Should we have a seat at the Republican Party table? Should we create a third party? Or should we continue to vote in overwhelmingly and faithfully on the Democratic ticket, hoping that it'll get better? What are your thoughts? 757-823-9110. And we'll talk about that in the second hour. But again, looking at the history of African Americans and voting for Democratic candidates. So, under Bill Clinton, who was elected president overwhelmingly because of African American support, there were a lot of things that the Clinton administration did to help African Americans and African American communities in business and so forth. A trailblazer in business and the like, Vernon Jordan, who was a mainstay during that time period, really helped a lot of African Americans in the corporate area. And there were many others on the ground level. I know African Americans who were appointed judges on the federal bench under the Clinton administration. So a lot of great things took place. But also, in the re-election, there was a very conservative consultant that Bill Clinton brought in to help him become reelected. And because of that, he had to swing to protect his reelection more in a conservative mind and more conservative policies, which ended up hurting African Americans. Now, again, this is after the Reagan era and the Bush era. And we talk about when we talked about the crack laws, when we talk about the private industry of business and government. Keep in mind, one of Ronald Reagan's legacies is that he helped to privatize federal government like no other president. So when people talk about Ronald Reagan being one of the greatest presidents ever, it was primarily because not just we were going against Russia, well, at the time the Soviet Union, which of course collapsed under economic restraint, because we helped to bankrupt them, which was a strategy. We kept building our defense systems, and we knew that the Soviet Union couldn't keep up. So we ended up bankrupting, and Gorbachev ended up working with the United States and tearing down the wall. The famous statement, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And communism fell as we knew it at that time period. But also during that time period, we were creating legislation. Crack cocaine was going through our communities. And we ended up victimizing African Americans and punishing them for not only distribution of the drug, but also use of the drug. And we started locking individuals up. And we saw the error of our ways under the Obama administration, where a lot of those laws were turned back and people were let out of jail because of that. And President Obama went through a very measured process to give those pardons to individuals who were in prison under those laws, as opposed to what our president is doing now, just handing out pardons, as they would say, all willy-nilly, just however he wants to do it. So that's another issue. But now, when we start to look at what took place under Reagan, and then the private prisons that were built, and keep in mind, under those private prison contracts that the federal government signed, the federal government guaranteed 80% occupancy. How do you guarantee 80% occupancy of a private prison? You got to create policies. You got to create policies in order to guarantee that individuals will be subjected to those prisons, and for a long period of time, because you can't make money in prisons unless you have somebody there for a very long stay. But again, this has been the African American vote. This has been the people that we've put in. And these have also been individuals that we've ignored, right? When we talk about the Republican presidents during that time period, Reagan, Bush, and then Bush's son for 8 more years. So since 1992, we can go all the way back to the 80s, 1980 all the way to 2020. We've had about half Republican, half Democrat presidents in office. But it seems like whoever is in office, the African American community continues to become victimized. The old adage, we say it, if America gets a cold, Black America gets the flu. And that's because we have holes in our system. We have holes in our community that still have not been addressed, gaps that still have not been filled. It's been ignored. We talked about healthcare. Under healthcare, COVID came and exposed the gaps that we have in our healthcare system as it relates to African Americans. So how do we address that? And without addressing it, anything that happens in our country, it hits the African American community much harder. Think about it. When we look at unemployment, when unemployment hits America, it's always double digits for African American communities, always double digits. And that's because we're not addressing the education gap. We're not addressing the labor gap. We're not addressing the business investment gap. We're not addressing the recruitment gap. We're not addressing the gaps that keep widening, the haves and the have-nots, the gap that keeps widening, the wealth gap for African Americans. So, in effect, the only way we can address these issues is if we have our public servants, our public officials, and our business community deal with our community so that we can give a solution to this issue. Now, you may say, hey, how do you do that? Let me give you an example. I remember earlier in this particular governor's time that we had his Governor Northam, the Attorney General during that time period was dealing with the opioid crisis, like many states were dealing with. And we know that one of the big pharma companies pleaded guilty to their role in pushing opioids and prescription opioids, and it went down to the doctor level, went all the way down to the supply level, But I remember in Virginia Beach, there was a family whose daughter was hurt as an athlete and She was prescribed these opioids by her doctor. She ended up getting hooked on it and, of course, ended up losing her life because of how powerful the opioid is. And we know that today. And our hearts go out to any family who's been victimized, by prescription opioids and turn to, the street version of that. And we hope that you get all the help that you need in order to recover. But I remember the Attorney General actually came down and sat with that family and talked about their story. And from there started working. It was a community effort and then a state effort for policy. And I started thinking to myself, how many African-American families were victimized by crack cocaine? How many African-American families were victimized by these unjust drug laws? And did any state official, federal official come talk with any families? Maybe they weren't asked to do it. Maybe they should have asked to do it. But again, that's an idea. That's how you end up holding your elected officials accountable for the things that will affect your community. But not just in a business standpoint. We talked about business and the decline of businesses of the African-American community, but also education. Let's look at our public schools. Public education is one of the staples of Reconstruction. When black legislators were in state offices and the federal offices and passing bills, Reconstruction bills, to allow for the education of not just black children, not just former slaves, but to allow for the education of all children. That was a major staple of the Reconstruction bills that were passed. Many great bills passed during Reconstruction by African-American legislators and legislatures made up of African-Americans. And that's something that's lost in history. So when we look at the attacks upon public education, I look up on an attack of that legislation that was the forerunner of what we see as public schools now. Because keep in mind, the public did not have a responsibility to educate anyone during the time of slavery. We're talking about white Americans as well. If you were educated, the church did it, or if you were wealthy, you had private tutors. And if you get closer to the beginning of our country, you had individuals that would send their kids back to England to be educated in the boarding schools there, or bring individuals here. Down in Louisiana, it went back to France, and there were some who were educated by French tutors. Yeah, whites were not educated either. But African-American legislators knew that in order to have a better society, a greater society, all people had to be educated. And this was an effort of the government to do. And I agree 1,000%. A more educated society is a better society, a more understanding society, a more tolerant society, but also a more respectful society. I don't have to agree with you. I don't have to agree with the way you live. You don't have to agree with me, but you got to respect me. You got to respect me. So with our public schools, look at our schools in our communities. When we start to look at African Americans and our faithfulness to voting on the Democratic side, are we getting the most for our vote for our schools? If we look around our area, our public schools, most of them are dilapidated. And I'm talking about in the center of the African American community. They're dilapidated. A lot of our schools lack the qualified teachers to come into our schools. They also lack the support for an effective PTA. And you're talking about somebody whose father was PTA president. I was a PTA officer in my kids' elementary school and worked during the middle school time and so forth, and being involved in their activities and so forth. You got to have parental support for your kids to be successful in schools. It's just not all about the teachers. It's not all about the building. But as parents, you got to be involved too. You got to do it. And that's when we talk about it takes a community to raise kids. That's one thing that we saw during our time period. We saw African Americans in our community saying, oh, there goes my future doctor there. There goes my future lawyer. There goes my future pastor. Oh, he's going to be a preacher. There goes my future teacher. There goes my future business owner, entrepreneur. Again, it was that encouragement, not so much chastising somebody else's child, not so much keeping or raising someone else's child, but being a support, a word of encouragement does a tremendous value to somebody's daily life. Heck, it does a tremendous value to me. And I'm an adult, I'm a grown man. But when someone gives me a word of encouragement, it helps me. And I'm not going to lie, we all have emotions, we all have feelings, we're all human. But some of us have, more, let's just say, a healthier self-esteem than others. So they end up allowing their haters to be their motivators, right? But some don't. But again, it's that word of encouragement that we need. But when we look at our Black community, when we look at the businesses, when we look at our schools, all of this works hand in hand with our public officials and public policy coming in to create opportunity, to move monies, to move resources, to move investors, to move housing developments, to move public works, to move new roads, to move biking trails, to move walking trails, to move parks, to move new schools, to move all these things into communities to make it a place to live. A great place to live. That all comes through public policy. That all comes through the business community. And the only way you're going to get that is if our public officials work on behalf of their constituency to get it done. We'll talk about in the second hour how, there are certain constituents that President-elect Joe Biden are paying attention to, and not so much the vote they got him there. But I want us to, before we talk about that and say what they're not doing, I want us to understand the history behind what we have done and continue to do, but yet not receive the full value of our vote. 757-823-9110. 757-823-9110. Today on State of the Water, we're talking about the Black vote. Are we getting the most for our vote? Or our communities getting the most? Are we getting the appointments in committees and other organizations that come through a political process, at the same level of our vote? Are our schools getting the support that they need? Are our businesses getting the support that they need? Are we getting the public works support that we need based upon the Black vote and our support of Democratic candidates in our community? 757-823-9110. But again, looking at the history, since 1964, we voted faithfully for the Republican Party. For the Democratic Party. And we've abandoned the other side of the aisle. So the question becomes, are we getting the most for our vote? Should we engage the Republican Party? Should we engage a third party? These are things that we want to know. And we're going to come back in the second half hour, and we're going to talk about this here on State of the Water. We'll be back in just a moment. Hi, it's Dr. Eric Claville, award-winning host of State of the Water, where we bring policymakers, movers, and shakers to you to discuss real issues and current events impacting African Americans. Tune in every Sunday at 1 o'clock here on WNSB Blazing Hot 91. State of the Water is engaging, educational, informative, and impactful, an initiative of the Center for African American Public Policy at Norfolk State University. Welcome back, and you're listening to Say the Word, and I'm your host, award-winning Dr. Eric Claville. We're glad that you're joining us here on this December 6th of 2020, and we hope that you're taking care of yourselves out there. We know that we're still living in COVID environment. We know that the weather's changing, and we hope that you guys are staying warm, staying healthy, and that we end out this year as great as we started it. And we want to definitely see you back in 2021. But today, on Stay the Water, we've been talking about the black vote and whether we've been getting the most for our vote. You know, in the first half hour, we talked about the history of African Americans and how we voted for the Democratic Party and how we identify with the Democratic Party. Over 80% of the time since 1992, according to the Pew Research Institute, African Americans identify as Democrats. Over 80%. That is an overwhelming amount. And we voted faithfully for the Democratic Party over 60% since the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights legislation, and up into the 70s and 80% from the end of the 60s into the 70s and the 80s, and then in the 80 percentile since 1992, during the time Bill Clinton was being elected. But in the second half hour, we don't want to talk about the Republican, Democrat, and third party. Should African Americans be a part and have a seat at all of these tables? We want to hear from you. What do you think? 757-823-9110. 757-823-9110. What do you think about African Americans being a part of the Republican Party? Prominent a part of. What do you think about African Americans being more involved with the Democratic Party? And what do you think about African Americans being a part of a third party movement? Let us know. What do you think? 757-823-9110. But I bring up this point about the black vote and if we're getting the most for our vote, because we tend to be the ones to push the Democratic candidate over the tipping point. Seems like every time. As a matter of fact, President-elect Joe Biden even talked about how he's going to remember the African American vote because it was the vote of the African Americans that got him over the line. You know, he said that himself. You know, he's going to remember that. And it's true. African Americans, if you look at it, we talked about this in a previous show. You know, we've supported we supported the Democratic candidate hand over fist. We got out. African Americans got out and registered new voters at a high rate, increasingly high rate. And it's a lot of African Americans that actually voted for the first time. Now, keep in mind, we said it before, according to Pew Research Institute, African Americans voted at a higher level than any other non-white group. And during the time period of Barack Obama, we actually voted as a percentage more than white Americans. Over 65% of eligible African Americans that are eligible to vote actually voted in those elections. That is a huge number. That is monumental. And I want us to put this into perspective. There are some elections that are held in what we call the mid-year elections around June, local right here, that will get less than 15% people voting. I've worked in some polls, and there have been some polls that reported less than 50 votes all day. And these are during the general elections. So when I talk about, we got a special election coming up here in Hampton Roads, here in Norfolk, for the 90th district, General Assembly district here. And January 5th, we're going to have a new person representing this area, the 90th district, because Representative Joe Lindsay was appointed a judgeship. Congratulations to Representative Joe Lindsay on your judgeship. We wish you all the best. And thank you for the representation you've given this area for all the years that you've given it. But we're going to have a special election, January 5th, 2021, to bring someone new into the 90th district. So what's going to be the turnout of that election? Is it going to be a 65%? Absolutely not. It's not. I'm telling you that right now. Historically, it doesn't happen. But it's going to be fairly low. And that person is going to get elected and serve this area for the next several years until re-election comes about. But Joe Biden said, I'm going to remember African Americans. I'm going to remember you because you were the ones that helped to get me here. Now, just this week, the president of the Urban League, Mark Morial, National Urban League, and also the National NAACP, Derek Johnson, mentioned that, yes, congratulations to the diverse party, the diverse candidates that President-elect Joe Biden has appointed to his cabinet. But they said that there is a lack of African-American candidates appointed. And not only that, but they still have not had, now they've scheduled it just now, but up until Friday, the presidential transition team had not engaged the two traditional civil rights groups that worked tirelessly to get voters to the polls to vote for Joe Biden. Not only, think about that, African Americans overwhelmingly elected Joe Biden. Overwhelmingly. But until Friday, until there was a public outcry by the president and CEOs of the two traditional civil rights groups that are still thriving today. There are other traditional groups, but they're not thriving like the NAACP and the National Urban League. They said that they had not even been consulted, not even a phone call to say, hey, what about us? Or what do you think about this particular individual? Right? Now, should he have had to do that? I mean, does he have to put out something public to say, hey, we're over here. Remember us? Literally 3 weeks ago? Remember us? Standing in the line for hours upon hours? Remember us? Going out, canvassing door to door in COVID environment? Remember us? Getting on every single talk show, defending and talking you up? Remember us? Should he have had to do that? Or is this a business as usual when it comes to African Americans and the Democratic Party and their vote? What do you think? 757-823-9110. 757-823-9110. So, but then we knew that Joe Biden was a centrist. We knew that he wanted to work across the aisle. We knew that he needed to bring the American system back together, right? And that included working with individuals across the aisle with Republicans, those that did not want to work with President Obama when he was vice president. But he does have those relationships. And look, I believe that out of all the candidates that we had, again, we got to deal with the candidates that we have. I believe that he was and is the best candidate for this particular time period. But we have a caller on the line. Caller, you're on Stay in the Water. Please give us your name and where you're calling from. Caller, you're on the line.
Yeah, I wanted to comment on the topic. I kind of feel like it is blacks are a forgotten topic with the incoming president. You know, we put our hope and trust in these candidates. We say we Democrat or Republican, but neither of them really do anything for us. So I think our thing is to unite now and realize that we have to do things for ourselves, you know.
Now, caller, thank you so much for calling Stay in the Water and letting us know about your feelings about this topic. But we didn't get your name or where you're calling from. Can you give us your name, where you're calling from one more time?
Yeah, this is Curtis calling from Virginia Beach.
Now, Ms. Curtis, you mentioned we're needing to do it for ourselves. So, we have to work through political parties. That's the way our system's set up. We have Democrats, we have Republicans. But do you think it's time for a third party, or do you think that African Americans should have a seat across the table with Democrats, Republicans, and third parties?
I would say a third party, but I think we need to get together as one and decide what we want. And like Ice Cube put together that contract for Black America, I think it was a lot of back and forth on that. It's like we're so divided and there's nothing for us. We're getting no tangibles for our votes. You know, I had actually planned on not voting, but I did vote for Biden, you know, because I felt like that's who my people wanted in there. But honestly, I think a lot of people are struggling with life, and they don't have time to study candidates and what's going on and this and that, you know. But that's why my concentration is on building myself up and getting myself, because as long as we consider ourselves Democrats and Republicans, that's a big fight to be fighting. And I guess I'm at a point where I'm just trying to live and make some money and make it. And these candidates, I don't expect them to do anything for us. I guess that's where I'm coming from. I really don't have an expectation of them, and I try to take my expectation off of them because I'm not to the point where I can sit down and study it. You know, I'm working every day. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of like that for me. But I don't put my trust in any Democrat or Republican.
You know, you bring up a very important point, and we talk about it a lot, how, you know, the reason why this show is so important is because, you know, again, we've got an opportunity. We study this every day, you know, and it's our opportunity to help inform the public about these issues that are up that a lot of times, you know, a lot of mainstream shows don't really talk about, you know. Exactly.
And I appreciate you for that, man, because it educates me. Like I said, I'm not really educated on what's what as far as politics goes, but I really feel deeply that we put a lot of trust in politicians, and honestly, we're not getting anything back from it. You know, we put a lot of energy. People will fight you over Democrat and Republican, and it's like, is it worth it for us right now? That's my question. Is it worth it for us to claim Democrat or claim Republican, and what are we getting from it, you know?
Ms. Curtis, thank you so much for your call. And again, thank you for voting. Don't ever give up. Don't ever give up.
Right, exactly. Thanks for your show, man. Very informative.
I appreciate it. Thank you again for supporting Stay in the Water.
All right, have a nice one.
You know, again, just as we mentioned to the caller, you know, we mentioned to him that this is the reason why we do this show, is because we want to talk about these issues. We want to give you an opportunity to hear what's not being said, but also talk about what's being said from a different perspective. In other words, how is it affecting you on the ground level? Because you're out there working every day. You're out there getting up in the morning. You're out there clocking in. You're out there giving the best service that you can give. You're out there making the best life that you can make for your loved ones. You're out there trying to get kids' homework done. Of course, we're all now in Zoom University and Zoom Academies, K through 12, and we're all struggling trying to make sure that we remain safe. And any little cough that we get, we're praying, hoping that it's not COVID. And at the end of the day, we still have to make our country and our area the best that it could be. And the only way we can do that, we keep doing our job, and then we do our job here at Stay in the Water and at WNSB and Norfolk State University at Spartan Nation to make sure that you're informed. And I don't want you to ever give up. I want you to go out there and vote, and I want to make sure that your voice is heard. You know, but the caller, Mr. Curtis, brought up another very important point. He said that, you know, we have to do it ourselves. And I hear that, and that's exactly right. I agree. But the way that we do that is that we have to make our demands known to our public officials. We have to make our demands known to the chambers of commerce. We have to make our demands known to our city councils, to our school board, to our school officials. We have to make these demands known, saying that, hey, if we're going to vote to put you in here, we want to get value for our vote. We're all taxpayers. We're all giving value. We're all going to the polls voting, but we want to ensure that we get value. We get value for it. Because I don't know about you, but I like waking up in the morning and seeing, hearing birds chirp, beautiful trees in the neighborhood, going on the walking trail, being able to smell good air without the environment being messed up by chemical plants or other industrial plants in residential areas. I want to make sure my kids go to good schools, safe schools. I want to ensure that the schools are welcoming to the parents as well, and doesn't look like you're going into a courtroom or a prison setting, with all these guards and resource officers and metal detectors and cars, police cars in the driveways and so forth. And they serve a very important part, but at the same time, school should be a safety, a place of a safe haven, a place to learn, a place to enjoy your friends and the like. But we want to make sure that our voice is heard. So how do we do that? We do that by putting people in position that are going to speak the truth and handle the business for the community for those people that can't handle it for themselves. Like I said, we're all working. So we need people, representatives who are going to be there and talk about these issues for us to the table, saying, listen, I've helped, to get this done. And I live in this neighborhood, and I've lived in this neighborhood, and I want this neighborhood to thrive. But we have another caller. Caller, you're on State of Waters. Give us your name and where you're calling from.
Great day. My name is Sean.
And Sean, where are you calling from, sir?
Virginia Beach.
Thank you so much for calling. This is State of the Water. What's on your mind?
Yes, I've been listening lately to mainstream media as well as underground news sources, and the blame has been given to President Trump that so many lives were lost due to COVID, and both sides have their reasons for the losses. And my logic is, we all agree that viruses are somehow created in a laboratory. That's if you subscribe to that idea or that logic. And if these viruses are created, these so-called viruses are targeted to cause illness and or death. And if we agree that these viruses are created in a laboratory to cause illness or death, then when these viruses are released, then people are going to die. So that's no different than a person who's been smoking for years or a person who just started smoking. The Surgeon General has placed warnings on cigarettes, stating, cigarettes may cause cancer or whatever else.
Right.
That's like your doctor saying that you have diabetes, but you go to your doctor and they don't give you the cure. They don't give you the holistic cure. But they put you on insulin.
Uh-huh.
So I subscribe or submit that people were going to die because there was an intent and people were targeted, whether it be from Wuhan, China, or wherever else this virus was released and created.
Well, Mr. Sean, I want to give a point to that what you're saying there. We don't know if people were targeted with this. We don't have evidence or proof, but we do know that the President of the United States, knew back in December and more specifically January that there was a virus in China, and he purposefully ignored it. As a matter of fact, there was even more push in the Intelligence Committee saying, listen, there's a virus that's here and it's going to be airborne if we don't have people wear masks and so forth and so on. And he ignored it. And then you got Perdue, Senator Perdue and Loeffler, who sold their stocks because we knew the economy was going to take a hit because of the information that they got, firsthand. But at the end of the day, President Obama dealt with H1N1. Remember that? The SARS virus, and it was in New York, and it was contained. People had to wear masks and gloves during that time period. And really, just like you said, we're going to have viruses. We're going to have diseases that come up as we come together closer and so forth. But it's incumbent upon our elected officials and our public service officials in order to give the public the notice and to do our very best to stop the virus from spreading. So, yeah, people are going to die, unfortunately, just like the flu. But the people that are dying now did not have to die if our president would have acted much sooner. So that's all part of it. But thank you so much, Mr. Sean, for your call. Thank you for listening. I'm sorry, go ahead. Yes, sir.
Another point, because their information wasn't accurate. Now, he did close the border, and then he also closed down flights from Japan. Now, he did say, and you can research the information, that he didn't want to alarm the American people. So there's no such thing as he didn't do anything about it. It's just that he chose, and he said in an interview that he didn't want to alarm the people.
Well, Mr. Shada, listen, if there's a hurricane coming, please let me know, because I want to make sure that I take care of myself and my family. But there's a lot of information out there, but in official reports that are going to come out with this COVID pandemic commission, and and the truth's going to come out. But one thing we've noticed about this president, you really can't trust anything that really comes out of his mouth, so it's kind of hard to do. But again, thank you so much for calling State of the Water. Again, when we talk about, our vote, when we talk about African Americans voting, and one thing I didn't have a chance to get from our caller because we actually ran out of time, and we want to get more callers in. So again, we thank Mr. Shawnai from Virginia Beach for calling in and continuing to listen to State of the Water. But when we vote, and whoever we give our allegiance to, we want to make sure that we hold them accountable. And one of the major issues with this current president, I'm going to deal with this for about 30 seconds because I want to get back to African Americans and the black vote, is that nobody held him accountable. His own party did not hold him accountable for the negligence, for his statements that he made that were blatantly harmful, that were hurtful, that were, bottom line, a president shouldn't talk that way. When you're the leader of a country and the leader of the free world and a representative to the rest of the world. But nobody held him accountable for the lies upon lies upon lies upon lies, just flat out lies. And even now, the secretary in Georgia of the elections, he's saying, he chastised his own party and the president, saying, stop it. Stop with this fear mongering. Stop with these lies. Somebody's going to die. Somebody's going to get killed. Somebody's going to get shot. So again, for those of us that want to listen to the president and take everything he says as truth, evidence shows that you can't do that. It's just, you just can't. But when we look at our party, when we look at the Republican Party, Democratic Party, or third party, the question becomes, should African Americans be represented across the board? If you're a registered Democratic voter, registered Republican voter, or you're independent, give us a call. We want to know, what do you think? 757-823-9110. 757-823-9110. Tell us why African Americans should stick with the parties that they're with. Should African Americans be represented across the board evenly with the Democratic and the Republican Party? Or should African Americans be independent and simply work with the parties that's in power at the time? The caller mentioned also Ice Cube, contract with Black America, how, we should do it for ourselves. And that's one thing that Ice Cube was doing. Ice Cube was putting together a plan saying, listen, these are the issues that I see that I think should be addressed by African Americans. And he's working, trying to get it together some more, and of course, some people he got some backlash saying, why are you working with this president? He said, look, this is the person that has the power of the pen, and he's ready to, and I'm willing to work with him if he's willing to work with this plan to get economic opportunity to African Americans. Because at the end of the day, that's what it's about, opportunity and getting value for a vote. But we have another caller on the line. Caller, you're on the line. Give us your name and where you're calling from.
Calling from Hampton, Virginia.
Yes, sir. And look, we're going to make it quick because we got several other callers that are calling in. The phone lines are lit up. Give us your name, sir.
Charles.
Charles, you're on State of Water. What's on your mind?
I think we should kind of just set our own things. As for, I was just responding to the question.
Yes, sir.
Like what type of party? I think as so-called African Americans, I think we should go ahead and just, be single for a while, and just kind of set up our own infrastructure and our own, things. Yes, the president does have some power, but at the same time, at each state is accountable for each thing. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
They're accountable for their people.
That's right.
Every state. So.
Right. And it goes back to what we talk about, where local politics is the most important. Mr. Charles, thank you so much for calling in. We got other callers on the line. Thank you for your support of State of the Water. We have another caller on the line. Caller, you're on the air. Give us your name and where you're calling from.
Regina, Portsmouth.
Ms. Regina, you're on State of the Water. What's on your mind? And we're going to make it quick because the phone lines are lit up on this topic.
Very quick. I'm older than probably most of your callers.
Yes.
I think anybody who thinks we're going to change things outside of the current parties is delusional. We just don't have that kind of power. Unless we work within what's already established, we can't change anything on our own. And one more quick thing. Viruses are not all created in the lab. Some are created just by simple mutation, which is a natural occurrence. And that's all I have.
Thank you so much for your input, and thank you for listening to State of the Water. We have another caller on the line. Caller, you're on the air. Give us your name and where you're calling from.
Hey, good afternoon. Frank calling from Norfolk.
Mr. Frank, you're on State of the Water. What's on your mind?
Yes, there was a caller that called a couple minutes ago. He was talking about the spread of the virus. I think his name was Sean from Virginia Beach.
Yes.
And you said that, he said that the virus is going to spread anyway, and that I think your statement was that you have to hold the president accountable. Well, I wanted to say, why hasn't anybody held Joe Biden accountable for the 93, 94 crime bill that he wrote that has locked up more African-American males than anyone?
Yeah.
Why are we? And he was asked if he would issue an apology, and he said, apologize for what? And that crime bill has locked up more African-American males, and the community has been greatly affected. How do I know? Because I'm a police officer and have been for 20 years, and I've seen the results of that crime bill. So why hasn't anybody held him accountable?
Yeah. You know what?
And also, and
go
lastly,
ahead.
I also think that maybe this station may be a biased station because you were quick to defend one party, and I heard you earlier stating that it wasn't about party, Democrat or Republican. So I hear bias. So if you could comment on why nobody has held former vice president accountable for his actions.
Right. And listen, I sure will, but I want to make this statement about the last verse where you talk about, the station being biased. We do our very best to give all issues across the board and with evidence. Okay. So when I state my opinion, I say it's my opinion, but I ensure that there's evidence behind everything that we state and not just emotional feelings. But thank you so much for calling State of Water, and thank you for your service, sir. Well, you've heard it. There's a lot of opinions out there, and that's one reason why we want the callers to call. And to the point, this is an opportunity here on State of the Water where we talk about issues that are important to you, the community, to find out how do you feel, but not just to find out, but we also try to give evidence-based results, evidence to give to you so that you can make a more informed decision. But again, we had a great discussion, as always, and we want to hear back from you. So come back every Sunday at 1 o'clock of State of the Water, where we discuss issues that are important to you, the community. I'm your host, award-winning Dr. Eric Claville, and we'll see you next week.